Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. The Madison County, Illinois State's Attorney is the Chief Prosecutor for Madison County. He represents the state of Illinois in court and prosecutes or defends lawsuits, applications, or motions, whether civil or criminal, on behalf of the state. Tom Gibbons is the state's attorney of Madison County. He was first appointed to his office in 2010 by County Board Chairman Alan Dunstan to fill the remainder of William Mudge's term when Mudge was elected a circuit judge. In 2012, Mr. Gibbons was elected to his own four-year term. This year, he is seeking re-election to the office of state's attorney. I've asked Mr. Gibbons to appear here today to discuss what he's accomplished since 2010 and whether his work has reduced criminal activity in the county. He'll also be discussing his campaign against drug dealers, trafficking in narcotics in Madison County, and prosecuting dealers for murder in cases of death by overdose. Tom Gibbons, welcome to Conversation.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be back.
Yeah, so 6 years for you, almost now. First of all, do you feel like you've accomplished something in 6 years?
I think we've made great strides. I was really fortunate in 2010 when I came into the office to take over the leadership role, though I'd been in the office for many, many years as a prosecutor. My predecessor, Bill Mudge, now Judge Mudge, he built a great foundation on the work of Bill Hayne, who was his predecessor and my first boss when I became an assistant state's attorney.
This is now State Senator
State
Bill
Senator
Hayne.
Bill Hayne, that's correct.
Okay.
And so I had a tremendous foundation to work on, a great staff, and as I took over the office and started to look at things and see how things were being run, I saw areas where I could make improvement. And I think we made tremendous improvements in the office and really built on that great foundation and taken things to whole new levels.
As you know, your opponent in the upcoming November election was here on this show, on this set, and he was respectful of you, but also made some challenges as to the success of your office. So I wanted to cover that right here at the very top.
Sure.
Some of what he indicated or stated was that of some 3,000 cases that were handled, I believe he said last year, which I guess would be 2015, and I don't remember if that was the period he was talking about, but there was 3,000 cases of which the vast majority of them were plea bargained down as opposed to taken to trial. And he seemed to, no, didn't seem to, he stated that that was a bad idea, that more cases needed to be actually taken to trial rather than pleading these cases down. Please comment on what he said and why you believe that doing what you did is more correct than what he said.
Well, let's begin with some facts. First of all, cases that are filed in 2015 are filed from January to December. So many of those cases remain pending. So it's not accurate to say that those cases have all been resolved. But more importantly, I think that the question about how many cases go to jury trial is something that the public deserves to know the truth about.
Yes.
As prosecutors, we are bound by law to be ready for trial. And every case that I have on my docket and the other prosecutors on their dockets are pretty much ready to go to trial within 120 or 160 days by law. The reason why cases are delayed in the criminal justice system is because of defense attorneys. And I'll tell you, my opponent, it's a pretty disingenuous criticism of him to say that it is the state's attorney's office who delays these things or causes things to be, the criminal justice system to be delayed or cases to not go to trial. And I'll tell you, it was interesting. After I saw his interview, I went and did a little research. And I'm about halfway through the number of cases that he did in his 12-year legal career. I believe he retired about 4 years ago. Hasn't really practiced in 4 years. And I went back through those 6 years of cases, and I I asked myself, okay, what is it that is keeping his cases from going to trials? And what I realized was really that looking at his record on the cases that he did while he was an assistant public defender the first 6 years, cases 2000 through 2006, what I realized that he was a Mr. Continuance. You couldn't believe the statistics. In those 6 years, he filed over 650 motions to continue. Mm-hmm. Now, a motion to continue is a motion that a lawyer files to delay the trial of a case. And in his cases, he filed well over 650. And when I totaled up the amount of delay that those motions to continue cost to the victims and to our community, it was over 85 years of accumulated delay in criminal cases. Now, by contrast,
I want to say something here,
sure,
because I've been watching the legal system for a number of years, and have had judges here, and you've been here before, defense attorneys have been here before. What I don't understand is, just because a man or a lawyer makes a motion or asks a judge for a continuance, why it becomes necessary to say yes.
Oh, well,
what is it about the system that causes 85 years worth of delays over a period of time?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I can tell you exactly why that happens. I have a perfect example. Last October, after a date that was set for 6 months, I, along with my first assistant state's attorney, Jennifer Mudge, we were ready to go to trial on the murder of a 20-month-old little boy against a defendant named John Holman. In that case, in April of 2015, the judge sat everybody down and said, look, we've got expert witnesses, we have witnesses coming from out of state, we need to know when this case is going to be tried and ready to go. Everyone agreed, including the defense, that in October of 2015 we were going to try that case. Mm-hmm. We were finally going to get justice for that 20-month-old little boy. Mm-hmm. So the Friday before trial, just a matter of a couple of days, when we had plane tickets already purchased for witnesses, we had people coming in from out of town and out of state to testify in that case, the defense attorneys came in and said to the judge, Judge, we need to continue this case again. We need to delay this again. Now, I pounded my fist on the table and said, no, 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 absolutely not. We've had this trial date for 6 months. It's time to get this case done. But this is what happened, and this illustrates to you why the control is completely out of the state's attorneys and often out of the judge's hands. The magic words out of the defense attorney's mouth were, Your Honor, if you force us to go to trial today, we will be ineffective for our client. And as you know, if our client has an ineffective lawyer, then they don't get a fair trial, and the appellate court will overturn any decision that a jury makes in this case. And in that moment, it was crystal clear to everybody in the room who controls the trial process, and it's the defense attorneys. Because they can claim that if they're not allowed a continuance in the case, that the case will be overturned and we will have to try it all over again, go to all the expense and all the difficulty, especially for the witnesses and the victims, that if we go forward, if the judge forces them to try the case will be overturned. And that, crystal clear, in a little nutshell, tells you exactly what happens. We have that happen over and over and over again by defense counsel, and the judges are powerless against it because they know the appellate court will do that very same thing. And we as prosecutors have absolutely no say-so in that process. We object, we put our objection on the record, it is noted, and there is no other ability for us to prosecute a case and move it forward. The people of the state of Illinois do not have a right to a jury trial. Did you know that? Prosecutors and the public do not have a right to a jury trial. It's only defendants under the Constitution who have a right to a jury trial. Right. We could be ready to walk in.
You could ask for the defense can ask for a bench trial with a judge only, correct?
They can, but the prosecutors have absolutely no control over that.
Right.
That is entirely in the hands of the defendant. In some states, the people do actually have a right to a jury trial. And as a representative of the people of our county, I think that would be a good step forward for us to have the ability to force cases to trial, to move cases forward on behalf of victims. But that example in the John Holman case, which we did end up trying in February, convicted the child murderer and saw a 70-year prison sentence. But that additional delay was solely because the defense counsel came in and said those magic words.
Did you see anything different between October and February that the defense had or that they accomplished in that time period?
Well, I don't know. It's hard to know what level of preparation they had. It's hard to know how much work they had done on the case because they don't really reveal that. All I can tell you is they had 3 attorneys and we had 2, and we were certainly ready to go well before October, but in October, as the judge commanded and as the order agreed, we were ready to go, but we were left unable to get the case prosecuted. Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, a criticism by a defense counsel that it is prosecutors that delay the cases is really disingenuous. In that same 6-year period, my opponent had those over 650 motions to continuing cases for over 85 years worth of accumulated time. Do you know how many the prosecutors filed and how much delay they caused? There were 4 motions to continue, less than 4 months of delay caused by prosecutors.
Okay.
So I think in large part, it's important for the public to understand that it really is the defense attorneys that are delaying trial of cases. Now, in terms of resolution of cases, I think it's also important for the public to understand that defendants plead guilty all the time. Defendants plead guilty every single day. And the reason defendants
But not to the main charge. They're pleading guilty to something less than the full crime that they committed. Isn't that right?
That's not accurate.
Okay.
No, in many cases, they're pleading guilty to what they were charged with.
Okay.
They're pleading guilty. They understand that the police have done a tremendous job, that we've got the evidence to convict them. They don't gain anything by going to trial. Mm-hmm. In the most serious cases, murders and other violent crimes, you know, sometimes there's a roll of the dice because they know that they don't have, no matter what they do, they're going to be going away for a really long time, so they may as well roll the dice. But in a lot of cases, because the law presumes probation, a defendant can come in and plead guilty to the offense, as they do every day, and ask the judge to sentence them without an agreement with the prosecutors. Happens every day, all the time. It's called pleading open. The defense comes in, they plead guilty, and the judge passes sentence. The law in Illinois presumes, meaning it essentially commands probation in almost every felony case. So if the law presumes probation, and a judge is required to give probation in most cases, as my opponent even said here on this very program, he's okay with probation in most cases because that's what the law says is supposed to happen. In nonviolent cases, in cases, especially now, a large chunk of the cases that we're dealing with are drug-related crimes, possession crimes. Those cases where people are pleading guilty, going into drug court, getting drug treatment, those people don't need to be going to the Department of Corrections. For nonviolent offenders, those people need to be put into diversion programs where we can give them an opportunity to turn their life around, get treatment for their addiction, and try to become productive citizens again. That's what's happening in the majority of our cases.
For those people who you convict, who get a certain number of years, who wind up in prison, and then all of a sudden you come to find out, you know, months later or maybe a couple of years later, boom, they're back out on the street again. How do you feel about that, first? And secondly, what needs to be done by the legal community, by all you lawyers from the beginning all the way up to the Supreme Court members to correct the system?
Well, I think that for many years, nonviolent offenders were being put in prison at a higher rate. And so places reserved in prisons that ought to be for violent offenders were being taken up by nonviolent offenders. We've made a lot of strides in the criminal justice community trying to identify nonviolent offenders who have the opportunity to get their lives turned around and to provide those opportunities. It makes sense. Probation costs about $5,000 a year. Prison costs anywhere from $25,000 to $40,000 a year. And many of those people who are nonviolent go into prison and return violent. So that kind of stuff doesn't make sense. You have to be sensible in the way that you handle the criminal justice system and the way that you try to address these problems. For violent offenders, we need better truth in sentencing. We have some truth in sentencing. But for people who are truly a danger to the community, we need the ability to guarantee that they're going to stay behind bars. And I want to give you a specific case example of where the system is broken right now. There's an individual named Angela Halliday. And if you search her name, she's repeatedly been a defendant in our courts. Back in 2011, 2012, during the height of her addiction and her addiction to heroin and her involvement in the heroin trade and in heroin cases, we charged her with drug-induced homicide. At that point in time, she and another defendant's cases came up, and the defense attorneys who represented them complained to the judge that the law didn't apply to them because the transfer of heroin took place in St. Louis, which in fact it had. And we were prevented from prosecuting them for drug-induced homicides. They transferred heroin to people, she and another person in those specific cases, transferred heroin to people. Those people died in Madison County, but the transfers took place in St. Louis, which is where most of the heroin is transacted nowadays. That individual was not held accountable for that case despite our attempts to prosecute her. Later, she was prosecuted for other drug offenses and went to the Department of Corrections for a period of time. She came back out. While she was back out, she was supposed to be going to drug treatment. She was supposed to be showing up for a probation officer, supposed to be tested. She failed to do that. I convinced a judge, my office convinced a judge to send her back to the Department of Corrections for 8 months. She was a person who was involved in 2 heroin overdose deaths. She was charged and tried for injecting someone with heroin causing an overdose that did not cause a death. And yet, as a person involved in those violent cases, she went back to the Department of Corrections. They walked her in the door, took her picture, processed her, turned her back around, and sent her home. She was supposed to have an 8-month sentence. The judge sentenced her to 8 months for violating the terms. When you have a revolving door at the Department of Corrections, when you have a Department of Corrections with a mandate to reduce populations by 25% regardless of the impact it has on the community, they're taking people like her, a real danger to our community, to our kids in our community, and turning her right back around and sending her home. People who are violent and dangerous to the community need to be kept in prison. We need to have room to put those people. We need to make sure that they stay there when they get there.
Which brings me to my second point that I asked you is it necessary at this point from a top to bottom rethink in the legal community about how criminals are handled?
Well, I think that
because it is. Let's face it. You get judges that, hey, you got to clear out the. They give an order. Hey, you've got to clear out your jails, or you got state legislators who refuse to give sufficient monies to deal with the violent criminals that you're talking about, or that when they're in prison, criminals are literally allowed to run wild within the prison because guards are afraid to go anywhere near these people. And it's almost here, I don't know this for a fact, that the prisons have been turned over to the criminals, and as long as they stay inside of the bars of the prison, that, well, we don't care what goes on there.
Well, I think that obviously the prisons need to be run by the guards. Prisons need to be run by the administrations. I, fortunately, don't have experience behind bars, so I couldn't tell you what it's like in the Department of Corrections. But all I can tell you is that people that we're sending away for substantial amounts of time are being sent home early. And many of them become more violent while they're there. It doesn't seem to be a place, that rehabilitates anyone. But from my point of view, with the responsibility to protect my community, it's important that we send them away. It's important that they stay off the streets and stay away from the victims, stay out of the community. And it's not my job to worry about how they're treated behind bars. I'm not worried about them getting more good stuff behind bars, more leisure time, better food, more opportunities while they're behind bars. My opponent brought that up. I thought that was pretty strange. That's not my responsibility as state's attorney.
I think he was mostly referring to rehabilitation or more professional counseling than they would get in, say, Madison County Jail as opposed to some prison.
Perhaps, but I can tell you that the Madison County Jail is basically the drug detox facility of last resort. It is a mental health facility of last resort, and that is a charge that they really shouldn't be responsible for. But they're being required to take responsibility for those kinds of things. Many drug addicts who are arrested for committing crimes are going through withdrawals and having to deal with that. And our sheriff's office and our jail are being forced to provide those services for them. Really, they're not the ideal location for it, but they're required by law to do it, and the citizens of our county are having to pay for it.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to just, on a personal note, this I have observed over the many years that I've been in and out of Madison County. When I was a college student at SIU, the Madison County Courthouse is pretty much a sleepy place where very little went on except that some drunks were dealt with, and it was a small-time place. Yeah, there was some criminal activity. It was a really small-time place. They had this little jail on Main Street, and that was big enough to handle most of the people that they were dealing with. I go off to the United States Navy. I come back years later. Literally, the first day that I'm back in town from the Navy, there is a daylight bank robbery right there at the old Edwardsville Bank that's right there on Main Street. And I thought, wow, things have changed. What, in your opinion, is going on that Madison County has gone from being this sleepy, non-criminalized kind of place, or very little crime, to what you are dealing with today?
Well, that's a really good question. I grew up in Madison County. I've lived here since pretty much almost the whole time since I was 3 years old. I remember a time I grew up in Edwardsville and Glen Carbon, and I remember that the space between those two towns was, fields, huge cornfields, yes. And there was a little gravel, an oil and chip road called Center Grove Road that ran between them, full of potholes. I think by and large it wasn't just Madison County, but I think it was the United States of America. I think it was our entire country. Attitudes have changed. I think people have changed in a lot of ways. The upbringing that I got, the kind of values that were instilled in me by my parents, aren't always being passed along generation to generation. In the business of criminal justice and prosecution, and my wife being a police officer for so many years, we see this. We see generations of families not teaching their kids, not teaching young people responsibility, not teaching them the basic rules of society, what's right and wrong. I myself, over the years, have prosecuted in some families 3 generations of people, and you can see that these patterns are repeated over and over again. And I think probably the best answer is those things get repeated over and over and over again, and eventually you have more and more people who do not recognize the basic values of our society, of honesty, decency, being law-abiding citizens and being productive. And there are just those people who are willing to do those types of things. I don't think that's unique to Madison County. I think we see that across the country. And it's important for those of us who still believe in those things, who still believe in having good, strong communities. We have to keep our eyes open. We have to be good partners with law enforcement. We have to make sure that we know our neighbors and we know what's going on with our kids. Those kinds of things are the things that keep communities strong. Many of the violent crimes that are committed in Madison County are by people who come from outside of Madison County. In 2012, we prosecuted a man for gunning down a little 12-year-old boy in Madison. And during the course of that trial, my first assistant, Jennifer Mudge, was the main lead prosecutor in that case. And she tells a story about one of the witnesses that they brought in to testify from federal from federal prison. And one of the things that he said when they were talking to him was, he said, I told that defendant, I told him, man, don't go to Madison County, don't commit your crimes in Madison County, because they will get you. And that's what we do. People come here and they commit crimes sometimes because we have a lot, we have an incredible bounty of opportunity, and that's based on the hard work and the good communities that people are building here. Sometimes criminals come here and target us because we have so much good here. When those people do that, we catch them, we prosecute them, we send them away. We cooperate with our federal partners, and sometimes we're able to put them in federal prison for much longer prison sentences. There's a model that we maybe need to be looking at here. The federal criminal system has the ability to put people away and keep them there for much longer periods of time. And I think a lot of it has to do with the truth in sentencing. People actually having to serve the substantial percentages of their time behind bars instead of being released on good behavior. Mm-hmm.
We got about 3-4 minutes left here, and usually at this time I go to the guests and say, hey, is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to discuss at this point? So is there something you want to say right now to the public that we haven't discussed so far?
Absolutely. I just want to thank the people of Madison County for giving me this great opportunity. I love serving the people that I live with. I love serving all the people in this community. I do my best to be out in the community on a regular basis to get to know everybody so that I can understand what it is that the people of our county want and need in the criminal justice system, and to make sure that I and the members of my staff are a good reflection of that. Madison County is an incredible place to live. It's very safe. Despite the complaints of my opponents saying that St. Clair County has a lower violent crime rate, I would ask you to go look at the uniform crime reports by the Illinois State Police that show that their crime rates are much higher than ours. In every category, no less than 20% higher in St. Clair County than Madison County. And that's because we are tough on law enforcement. We cooperate with our law enforcement partners. We have good community cooperation. And people just do things right here. It's a great blessing and opportunity for me to be state's attorney and to lead such a great team of people working for justice for our citizens. I look forward to continuing to serve, and I hope that my 267,000 bosses out there who I work for every single day will again give me the honor to continue to work for them, serve them, and provide justice.
Is this a stepping stone to higher office for you?
No. I've been asked by people, do you want to, why don't you run for governor? And I always tell them, I don't want to go to federal prison. No, I love being here. This is where I want to be. This is where I intend to work the rest of my life. I'm not interested in being a legislator. I'm not interested in Springfield or Washington. I don't want any business. I don't want any part of that business going on there. I want to be here and serve the people that I live with, and that's what I intend to do the rest of my life.
And just very shortly, when we first talked, I believe it was in 2012, this was shortly after I had had a conversation with the coroner's office, and that's where I first learned about the heroin epidemic. And then you and I had this conversation about heroin. Is that about the same, less, or worse than it was in 2012?
Well, I think in terms of the number of overdose deaths, it continues to rise. It's a problem that was growing for over a decade, and it's going to take a long time to get a handle on it. One of the great successes that we're starting to see in our statistics is that the average age of overdose victims is rising. What we believe that means is, with all of the educational efforts we've been providing, we've visited with over 20,000 students around Madison County, telling them about this problem, helping them understand the dangers, and giving their parents tools to work with this. We believe that we are slowly aging this problem out, but it takes a generational shift. And I tell students all the time, it's up to you and your peer group to change the world. So,
yeah, well, when I was a kid, heroin was like, wow, no.
Didn't even exist.
Right. Anyways, I want to thank you very much for being with us today, and well, we'll see you again.
Thank you.
Yeah. I've been speaking with Tom Gibbons. He is the Madison County State's Attorney. He is seeking re-election in the November election. We're going to be uploading this to YouTube, so just go there, look, Conversation with Lee Presser, Tom Gibbons, and you'll find it. Thank you. See you next time.